On Saturday, October 6 of 1990, Officer Michael Hull was dispatched to a gated community at the Fountains, a suburban area in Henderson, Nevada. Upon his arrival, Officer Hull was approached by a security guard on duty that day. The guard informed the officer that a resident, 71-year-old Frank Allen, claimed that someone was attempting to take his life as blood was streaming down the side of his head. In order to understand the details of this case, I need you to follow me to Henderson, Nevada. Henderson, Nevada is renowned for its museums, exhibits, award-winning parks, biking paths, and hiking trails. Situated just 17 minutes from Las Vegas, it is acknowledged as one of the safest cities in the United States, with a population exceeding 300,000 residents and a low crime rate. Nevertheless, even the safest cities are not immune to crime, bringing us to our next case, which occurred on October 6 of 1990. Just a few weeks prior, 71-year-old homeowner Frank Allen resided in a gated community called the Fountains in Henderson, Nevada. One day, he responded to a knock at his front door from an unknown man by the name of Joseph Smith, who showed interest in buying his home. Frank had explained to the man that his property was not for sale, but nevertheless, Joseph was so insistent on making this purchase, he even offered $50,000 over the appraised value, which was assessed at $650,000. Frank Allen agreed to sell his home to Joseph under one condition. He would need to remain in one of those rooms until the property was officially sold. Joseph informed Frank that he, along with his wife Judith and his two stepdaughters, would be moving into the home as soon as possible because of his stepdaughter's upcoming wedding in November. Consequently, Frank agreed to hand over the keys while Joseph wrote a good faith deposit check for $35,000. A few days later, after depositing the check, 71-year-old Frank Allen would receive news from the bank indicating that the check was voided because Joseph Smith had closed his account. Upon receiving this news, Frank decided to reach out to Joseph regarding the check, and Joseph would apologize for the situation and agreed to send a new check via priority mail the next day. A few days later, after not yet receiving the check, Frank will call Joseph to inform him that he will be in town on Friday, October 5th of 1990, and the plans to pick up the check once he arrives in Nevada. Joseph agreed, but mentioned that he will leave the check for the October mortgage along with the $35,000 deposit and Frank's mail behind the wet bar in the house. This is because he and his wife Judith intended to go to California on Friday to shop for furniture. And on Friday, October 5th of 1990, Joseph Smith noticed that Frank Allen had not arrived at the house that morning. Concerned, Joseph would reach out to Frank to inquire about his whereabouts as he anticipated Frank's arrival. Frank would inform Joseph that he was running a little late and would arrive a little later on that night instead. At around 1 a.m. on October 6 of 1990, 71-year-old Frank Allen would return to his home at 2205 Versailles Court, located in the gated community known as the Fountains in Henderson, Nevada. Upon entering, Frank would find a note from Joseph Smith, which informed him that his mail, along with the two checks, one for the mortgage and the $35,000 deposit for the house, could be located in another room. As Frank began to make his way through the other rooms, he will come across a second note that was left by Joseph. The note mentioned that Frank's checks and mail were in a different area of the house. And while heading towards the game room, Frank would notice Joseph Smith kneeling in the closet of that very room. Frank would then inquire about what Joseph was up to, and suddenly, Joseph would leap out and start assaulting Frank with a hammer, relentlessly striking the 71-year-old man in the head. As Frank tried to defend himself, he eventually managed to push Joseph away and rush down the stairwell towards the front door, only to realize that he had locked himself inside. With Joseph in close pursuit, Frank makes a desperate escape by crashing through the glass window, jumps into his car, and speeds down to the security post, which was located in the front of the fountains. Once Frank reached the security post, he began banging on the window and pleading with the security guard to call 911 as blood dripped from his head down to his shirt. He had informed to the guard that Joseph Smith had attempted to take his life with either a hammer or a hatchet and that he urgently needed help. The security guard will call 911 to report the attack on Frank. When Officer Michael Hull had arrived at the scene, Joseph Smith had already entered his car and driven out the gated community. Additional officers from the Henderson Police Department will follow Frank Allen to his residence at 2205 Versailles Court, and upon their arrival, they noticed a broken glass window on the front porch. Frank had to explain that he had to run through the window in order to escape from Joseph Smith. As authorities begin walking through the premises, they will come across the 12-year-old body of Christy Cox. Her body was covered with a sheet and she was bludgeoned to death. In the second room, authorities would discover a second body. That body will be later identified as 20-year-old Wendy Cox, who was Joseph Smith's other stepdaughter. She was also found bludgeoned with severe traumatic injuries. As the officers continued their search throughout the house, they entered the master bedroom, where they uncovered the body of Joseph Smith's 47-year-old wife, Judith Smith, lying under the sheets in a pool of blood. The Henderson police began to launch their investigation into the murders of Judith Smith and her two daughters, Christy and Wendy Cox. Following this, a manhunt will be initiated for 50-year-old Joseph Smith. The autopsy on all three victims revealed that they all had been strangled and struck with a hammer. Meanwhile, 71-year-old Frank Allen would survive his injuries as the search continued for Joseph Smith. 6 months went by without any new updates or the whereabouts of 50-year-old Joseph Smith until America's Most Wanted aired his case on the January 23, 1991 episode. His case was revisited twice, first on March 20th of 1991 and again on November 6th of 1991. Shortly after that broadcast, an anonymous viewer will contact the telecenter to report that Joe was living in Watts, California, near Los Angeles. Although he was hiding in a motel, he managed to escape just minutes before he can be captured. Once law enforcement confirmed that he was in the Los Angeles area, they began to shift their focus on his brother Harold, whom they know that he will be in close contact with him. After 5 days of surveillance, they located Joe's residence on April 22nd of 1991, just 20 minutes later. He was apprehended at the Dream Motel on West Imperial Highway in Inglewood, where he was registered under a false name. Inside Joe's room, detectives will find multiple credit cards and identification cards. He had informed the police that he was in the process of creating a new identity and acknowledged that he had seen the last airing of the show. He also mentioned that being a fugitive was very difficult and that he had always anticipated that someone would eventually come for him. He expressed relief that it was over, but yet he stated that he had gone on the run to prove his innocence. 2 days later, Joe was returned to Nevada, and on November of 1992, he stood trial for the murders and the attempted murders of Wendy Cox, Christy Cox, Judith Smith, and the attack on Frank Allen. At his trial, Joe testified that he had been involved in a drug dealing operation in California that had ties to the Colombian drug dealers. During one transaction, he kept cocaine and money that belonged to the operation. According to him, on the morning of Friday, October 5th of 1990, he woke up to find 3 men in his room. They forced him into the game room and then left the house. He then discovered Judith and her daughter's bodies. He claimed that he did not go to the police because they would have assumed that he was the one who committed the murders. He also claimed that he attacked Frank because he thought Frank was one of the killers returning back to the house. He refused to be cross-examined on his story, and on December 11th of 1992, Joe was convicted on all 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. On January 26 of 1993, he was sentenced to death for Christy and Wendy's murder and life for Judith's murder. In 1994, he would appeal his conviction and sentencing, and in September, the state Supreme Court affirmed his convictions but vacated the death sentences. Ruling that the jury had given improper instructions, they ordered a new sentencing hearing. At the hearing in April of 1996, Joe expressed remorse for the murders and asked for leniency. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before again sentencing him to death. In January of 1998, the state Supreme Court vacated his death sentence in Christie's murder, ruling that the jury instructed given by the judge in the case was wrong. However, the court affirmed the death sentence in Wendy's murder. Joe would remain on death row, and in July of 2021, he became a part of a lawsuit against Nevada prison officials regarding their decision to imply a new lethal injection protocol for future executions. Joseph Smith would pass away on May 20th of 2023 while serving his death sentence at the Northern Nevada Correctional Center. He was 82 years old. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this case in the comments below, and please continue to pray for the family of Judith Christie and Wendy Cox. May their legacy continue to live on with those who miss them the most, and may all three victims rest in peace as we continue to advocate for them, through them, and about them. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and to share for updates on these cases and great content. Until next time, remember to love one another, pray for one another, and spread kindness to each other. Happy New Year, and thanks for watching.